Hi, this is the Folksy Friend, and on this channel I like to talk about stories. In particular, folk tales, beliefs, and mythologies. And on Tuesdays, we talk about Tolkien. Today is Tuesday, so let's go. The greatest evil that Arda has ever known, Melkor, has spent 3 ages imprisoned in the halls of Mondos for his threatening behavior against the elves. He has now served that time, been released, and now has free rein to roam around Valinor as he chooses. He's taken all of his hatred, his malice, his envy, and masked it with a face of friendship, because he has focused his attention on the elves, particularly the Noldor, helping them, offering knowledge, labor, trying to get them to trust him. Now, despite Melkor prancing around Valinor as he pleases, there is still relative peace, and it was during this time that the greatest creation the elves have ever made came into being. Feanor, who is undoubtedly the greatest and most talented smith to ever exist among the elves, was inspired by the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, Telperion and Lorelin. It was the most beautiful light to ever exist, and he decided he wanted to try to preserve that light. The Histories of Middle-earth tells us that Feanor first went to his half-niece, Galadriel. Her hair was said to shine silver and gold. He wanted to use her hair as inspiration for whatever it was he was going to create, but even though he asked 3 times, she refused him. Galadriel did not trust her uncle, and he had made it pretty plain over the years that he really had no love for her father or their whole side of the family. So left to his own devices, Feanor gathered all his knowledge, his skill, and his power, and poured every part of himself into the creation of 3 great jewels. He called these jewels the Silmarils. They were made of a type of crystal that was like diamonds, only stronger. Nothing in the world could break or crack the crystal, and only Feanor himself knew what it was made of. But this crystal part to the gems was only the exterior, housing the light within them, in the same way that a physical body is only a house for the inner spirit or soul. The inner fire of the Silmarils Feanor made blended the light of the trees of Valinor. So even if the stones were hidden in darkness, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like stars of Varda. So these jewels, made of a substance only known to Feanor, had a kind of sentience. They loved the light and would reflect any light they were given back radiantly. And even if there was no light, they would still shine of their own accord. Everyone in Aman who saw them was amazed by these jewels. Varda hallowed the Silmarils so that no mortal, unclean, or evil hands could ever touch them without being burned and withering away. And Mondos himself foretold that the fates of Arda, earth, sea, and air, lay locked within them. Melkor saw the Silmarils, and his hatred, envy, and lust for what the elves had was increased tenfold. He was even more eager to destroy the elves and take what they had. Melkor kept a good face, biding his time, acting as the Noldor's friend, sharing with them his knowledge and his skills. But wherever he would spread knowledge, he would also spread lies. And in a great game of telephone throughout Tirion, information would pass from elf to elf, from house to house, stories would grow, and Melkor's influence began to spread. Finally, when Melkor saw that enough of the Noldor trusted him, he began to spend more time physically walking among them. As he continued to share information, knowledge, tell stories, he wove his influence into his words so subtly that those who listened to him thought that they were having their own ideas, completely unaware of Melkor's influence. Think Inception, but with magic. Melkor created visions in their minds, making them believe that there were lands to the east that were made to be ruled by the elves, that Iluvatar himself had meant for them to rule over Middle-earth. And the Noldor began to murmur that the Valar had brought them to Valinor out of jealousy and a fear that one day they would become too many and too powerful to control, that the Valar were depriving them of their freedom and their God-given right to rule the lands in Middle-earth. Then, as these rumors were swirling around, Melkor took advantage of a secret that the elves did not yet know. The Valar were aware that sometime in the future, mortal men would awaken in Middle-earth the same way that the elves had awoken in Middle-earth. But the elves didn't know that. Melkor twisted the truth to make the elves believe that these mortal men were going to take over ruling the lands of Middle-earth, that the Valar saw the mortal men as easier to control, so that they themselves, the Valar, could remain in control of the world, cheating the elves out of their inheritance. And there were many of the Noldor who believed that there was some truth to this rumor. Of all the Noldor who began to hear these murmurings and whispers, Feanor was most taken with the idea of there being freedom and open lands to the east. Of course, this absolutely delighted Melkor, who was still desperately lusting for the Silmarils and hated Feanor with a vengeance. Melkor, not for lack of trying, could not even get close to the gems. Feanor would wear them on his circlet at formal gatherings, so they would shine on his face. Otherwise, they were locked up deep in his vaults and well guarded. Feanor began to love the Silmarils with a very possessive, greedy, and envious love. He only allowed his sons and his father to even look at them. And in time, he even began to believe that the light that shone within them was his own. As dissent and pride started to run rampant through the Noldor, it not only affected Feanor, but also his half-brother, Fingolfin. They were both considered high princes of the Noldor, each being the eldest son from their mothers. But that overinflated pride began to act as a poison, and they began to feel envious of the things that their own father had. So Melkor turned his attention to the royal family specifically. In time, Feanor began to hear rumors that Fingolfin and his sons were plotting to take over rulership of the Noldor. They would cast aside Finwe and skip over Feanor's inheritance as Finwe's eldest son. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he also heard rumors that this coup was supported by the Valar, because they were angry Feanor had not given them the Silmarils. On the other side, Fingolfin and Finarfin, the sons of Indis, Finwe's second wife, heard very different rumors. They heard rumors that Feanor had never loved them or their mother, which has a ring of truth. But that now he had grown so powerful and influential among the Noldor, it was only a matter of time before he threw them and their families out of the city. By this time, the Noldor were both proud and angry. Melkor took full advantage, beginning to advise different families of elves of the possible need for weaponry. He would go from major household to major household, making it seem like only they were privy to this warning. In time, many of the elves within the city of Tirion were forging weapons. They also created shields and began wearing them out into the city, but no one spoke of the weapons they had created because each thought they were the only ones that had them. In secret even to Melkor, Feanor had started his own forge. He made great swords for himself and his 7 sons, and his father-in-law rued the day that he had taught Feanor so much of the skill that he himself had learned from Aule. The dissent continued to grow, and eventually Feanor spoke openly about rebellion. He spoke out against the Valar, that they were holding the elves captive, that he would go east and anyone that followed him would join him in freedom. Of course, Finwe got word of what Feanor was openly shouting in the streets, and he called together a council of all the high lords of the Noldor. Before any of the lords could arrive, however, Fingolfin burst into his father's rooms and demanded to know what Finwe was going to do about Feanor. He said Feanor was behaving like he was king, like he was speaking for all of the Noldor. Fingolfin also reminded his father that Finwe had been one of the first 3 elves of them all who had gone to Valinor and had persuaded the rest of their people to follow him and to come here from Middle-earth. Fingolfin said that if Finwe did not regret what he had done, then Fingolfin and Finarfin would support him. Unfortunately, however, at that moment, Feanor himself arrived, armed and armored. "So it is, even as I guessed," he said. "My half-brother would be before me with my father, in this as in all other matters." Then he drew his sword and demanded Fingolfin get out. Without a word to Feanor, Fingolfin bowed to their father and left the room. That did not appease Feanor. He followed Fingolfin out, and on the doorstep of their father's home, in the middle of the city, he pressed his sword to Fingolfin's heart and threatened him. He said that if Fingolfin ever tried to take his place as heir and in their father's heart, Feanor would kill him. Again, Fingolfin just didn't respond. He simply walked away to find Finarfin. It was this threat that finally moved the Valar to action. They had been watching the dissent and the issues grow throughout Tirion, but because of how just sneaky and subtle Melkor was, they thought it was Feanor who was spreading all of the problems, because he had been the first to speak openly about rebellion. Not to mention, it was very clear that he was hot-headed and arrogant. Manwë had been upset over what was happening for quite a while, but he didn't do anything because they had brought the elves over to Valinor to protect them. They never intended to keep the elves prisoner, so if the elves wanted to leave, they could. But when Feanor physically threatened to kill one of his own family members, they could not just let that slide. So all of the elves that were involved in this altercation were summoned to the throne circle of the Valar, the Ring of Doom, and Feanor was placed before Mondos to be interrogated. It was through this questioning that Melkor's involvement was finally revealed. The Valar realized that it was Melkor's deceptions that were at the root of what had been happening among the Noldor, and immediately Tulkas sprung up and rushed off to find him. But Feanor was not let off the hook. He had still acted of his own accord and threatened Fingolfin. Mondos had a few choice words for him. He told Feanor that since he was so obsessed with the idea of getting out from under the control of the Valar, he should know that Manwë was not only Lord of Aman, he was Lord of all of Arda. So there was nowhere Feanor could go that he would escape Manwë's rule. And along that same vein, no matter where he was in Middle-earth, what he had done was unlawful. Mondos sentenced Feanor to 12 years of banishment from the city of Tirion, the place where the crime had occurred. Mondos told him to reflect on his actions, and in 12 years he would be summoned again, and at that time, someone could release him from his banishment. Fingolfin said that he would be the one in time to release Feanor, but Feanor said nothing. So Feanor left the city. Not only did his sons follow him, but his father did too, and Fingolfin took over as ruler of the Noldor in Tirion. Even though they all now knew that Melkor had been the cause for all of the anger and the tension between them, Feanor had still made the choice to draw his sword, so the animosity remained between them and between their sons. Feanor's group went north and made a home for themselves in the hills, and there they created a great stronghold, a treasury for their many gems. And they created a chamber of iron to house and protect the Silmarils. This new home was called Formenos. Now at the time all of this was happening, Tulkas was still hunting for Melkor, but he could not find him. Melkor knew that all of his scheming was laid out in the open and that they would be looking for him. So he took the form of a cloud and hovered among the other clouds around the hills. And eerily, all those within Valinor saw the light of the trees dim and all their shadows lengthen. Then Melkor went to Formenos and spoke to Feanor at the door. Once again, Melkor tried to manipulate him, saying that the Valar's actions had proven that they were unjust. He told Feanor that he could help him get over to Middle-earth, reminding Feanor that he was just as powerful as the rest of the Valar. And then he flattered Feanor. Feanor actually thought about it. He was very humiliated by what Mondos had said to him, but Melkor then took it a step too far. He made a remark that Formenos was well guarded, but the Silmarils would never really be safe in any land that the Valar ruled. The threat over his most beloved and prized possessions awoke a raging fire within Feanor. And Feanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Then, at seeing Melkor's true goal, hate overcame Feanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor and bade him gone, saying, "Get thee gone from my gate, thou jail crow of Mondos." And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Ea. I had to read that scene in Tolkien's own words just to really show how much Feanor is. Mighty, powerful, foolhardy, arrogant, I don't even know. All I know is that he had the gall to slam his door shut in the nose of the greatest evil of the world. But someone in Formenos had sense, and this exchange terrified Finwe. He immediately sent messengers to the Valar to tell them what had just happened. Melkor himself, highly humiliated by being reminded of his imprisonment and turned away, knew that he had to make a run for it. The Valar themselves were back in the Ring of Doom, this time discussing the lengthening of the shadows and what that might mean, when the messenger from Formenos arrived. Arome and Tulkas jumped up to take off after him, but before they could leave, more messengers arrived, this time from the Noldor and the tuuliky. Those in Tirion had seen Melkor in the shape of a great thundercloud make his way through the Calakiria. Then the tuuliky had seen his shadow cross over Alqualande and head north. Manwe thought that Melkor must be heading back to his old strongholds in Middle-earth, so that's where he sent Arome and Tulkas. But as soon as they got north of the tuuliky, they could not find any trace of where Melkor had gone. All they could do was double the guard at their northern border and wait. The light of the trees brightened again, proving to the Valar that Melkor had left Valinor. But even though bright light filled the land again, in Amon there was an air of dread, because everyone who lived there knew evil was likely to return. So join me next week when I go over exactly what happens when the Valar's worst fears come true and Melkor gets his revenge. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe if you want to. That would be awesome. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you next week.